Yo guys, it's Gilded here. Today I'm going to be covering the recent Taipei game show interview for Elden Ring with the game's producer, forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Yasuhiro Katao. And he's given a lot of juicy and new information from some of the questions that the general audience and the fans asked. Anyways, let's get started. So starting off, we're going to be talking about George R.R. Martin's involvement with the overall world design and some of the themes that were chosen for Elden Ring. Some might be confused initially as to what George R.R. Martin's role was with Elden Ring, but for clarification's sake, he played a huge role in the world design and the fantasy themes that we currently understand so far. After that point, Fromsoft basically took all of those elements and manifested them into physical environments, like the world detail, the animals, the creatures, the enemies, the overall landscape, things like the Erd tree in the sky, crazy stuff like that. Next up is the map. The map, as we already know, is pretty massive. This area seen here was the play space that we were limited to in the network test. But there are several other locations that appear to be just as large, with more dungeons, optional bosses, and a great number of enemies that we haven't encountered or seen yet. But then again, this is a new information, so we'll hop on to the next topic. So the next one being, what we learned from this interview is that the game is officially finished and the master copy is being reviewed right now, with a day one patch in the works. This day one patch, upon the game's release, will be dropped for a digital download across all systems. This will cover various fixes, things that they might have missed initially from months ago. Some of this will involve some feedback for the closed network test that took place. Next up is an approach to combat. Yasuhiro Katao stated that the combat could be approached differently in Elden Ring. As we know, in Dark Souls, enemies and the player would almost always see each other in a more closed-in setting. This is more described in Katao's words. But with Elden Ring's more open world design, the player would more frequently spot enemies long before they would start charging you, allowing a greater potency for archery and magic at a distance. He also said that players who are more comfortable with melee weapons in Dark Souls would be more incentivized to try out magic this time around. As a side note, this can also allow you to decide how exactly you want to approach this situation. In which manner you want to take out the enemies to reach your goal is entirely up to you, and what your backup plan could be if you ultimately end up getting spotted and overwhelmed in, say, like a camp. So the next new bit of information that we're going over here is the new Summonable Spirit. It looks like a sort of griffin of some sort. It's able to spit fire and take on a decent number of enemies at a time. Spirits are, of course, summonable by a particular item in your quick bar to spawn creatures to fight alongside you for when you're playing alone, since spirits can't be summoned during cooperation or multiplayer sessions. Now, these guys obviously won't do the heavy lifting for you, but if you're overwhelmed or want to draw aggro away from yourself, these guys can be invaluable in a pinch. We now have a new armor set too that got shown to us in some additional gameplay. We see the player riding Torrent, our mount for Elden Ring, with a full set of what appears to be some classic Japanese samurai warrior armor. It looks really awesome. If this is telling to what the rest of the armor will be like for this game, I think the Fashion Souls opportunities are going to be insane. I'm so excited for this element of roleplay for Elden Ring. Powerstancing whips make a return, straight up from Dark Souls 2. We can power stance with whips, which is a wonderful sight to see, as power stancing these in Dark Souls 2 is definitely more of a unique way to approach combat in that game. Love to see it. So next up is a return to messages and bloodstains. These are making a return once again, and can actually serve as a useful means for learning about the environment you're in, or could be misleading and you are told to attack an illusory wall that is just a regular wall. I know the Dark Souls community would never fall short of this, since you can get pretty creative with these messages. Here's hoping for a return of Tri-Horse Butthole, please Miyazaki. So with one of the first questions that was asked by the general public, and I would assume fans of the game franchise in general, someone asked, how much replayability is there? Now, New Game Plus and beyond seems to be making a return, After completing the main game and reaching the end, you could start a new journey with the same character, and with all of your existing items and stats carrying over, of course, while also fighting enemies who are both able to deal greater damage to the player, as well as are harder to kill. It's the classic formula from Dark Souls. As a side note, it's understood that based on Katao's response to a question in this interview, is that it's technically impossible to 100% the game on the first run. It's making the New Game Plus and beyond necessary to complete the game in its entirety, much like how Dark Souls had approached 100% completion in the past. Now, next up, let's go ahead and talk about how weather would affect the game overall. Enemy patrol and location behavior won't really change based on the day and night cycle, and regardless of the weather conditions. This, in words of Katao, is to avoid overwhelming the player to meet a certain time frame for approaching the enemies, and really allow them to engage when they choose to do so. It was also mentioned that certain enemies would appear at night, although it was clarified that this would be a small amount, so this really wouldn't be critical to your playthrough if you miss them entirely. Weather, however, does change gameplay somewhat. Using Katao's example in particular, if it's raining during the night, an enemy's ability to spot you would actually worsen, making stealth a lot easier as opposed to broad daylight. So this next topic coming up is about the game's difficulty as you progress throughout the levels. The beginning area, which is our first major starter area, Limgrave, it's the actual starting location that's designed to be on par with the player as they start out in the game. But as you delve deeper into the further regions and explore dungeons that stray far from where you started, you'll notice a spike in difficulty. Now, this is a pretty good indicator that you should level up first. Find the gear that, suits you the best to make your journey a little easier as you go on before you proceed to later parts of the game. But this, of course, doesn't mean you shouldn't just go straight into a higher tier zone if you're feeling a little adventurous, of course. In this closed network test, we started in Limgrave, then worked up to Stormvale Castle, where we eventually fought Margit, the Fell Omen, the area's major boss. But according to this interview, we can actually skip the entire area and move on to a different region entirely. How much we can skip remains to be seen, so we'll just have to wait on the game's full release before we learn more about how much freedom we'll actually have. So another important topic that I wanted to cover is the involvement of what they called event scenes, or as we come to understand it, cutscenes, and how it integrates itself into gameplay. As we understand, there will be a lot of NPCs to talk to in this game, as well as there being some cutscenes here and there. These scenes, however, will likely be limited to really important events, such as a major boss's introduction, or when the story has progressed in some sort of significant way. There is also a location known as the Roundtable Hold, where several friendly NPCs, actually, are able to be conversed with, which can be more closely compared to the dilapidated temple in Sekiro, or alternatively, the Firelink Shrine in Dark Souls 1 and 3, and Majula in Dark Souls 2. So the next upcoming topic is about world story and the game's story. Like Dark Souls again, the story is inferred through various item descriptions and every NPC's perception on the world of Elden Ring. In this case, where the player can actually speculate on the why and the how for the story that takes place without really being too on the nose with the overall plot. I'm personally glad to see this style of storytelling make a return, since it's always nice to come up with your own theories for what you're actually doing as you gain more information about the world around you. I personally like this form of gameplay, and the developers seem to really have harnessed that in the spirit and style of their other Souls games. Now here's a topic that's actually a function of consoles rather than the game design overall. This is for the haptic feedback for the PS5. From this interview, we learned that haptic feedback will actually be used for the PS5's controllers in Elden Ring, although it won't be utilizing the 3D audio function like what I assume what Demon's Souls implemented with its remake for the console. What this would probably mean is that sound that you hear in the world would make your controller vibrate accordingly with the intensity and location of its original audio source. It's really cool stuff, by the way, but given that this isn't a PS5 exclusive, I could kinda understand why this wouldn't be a feature for Elden Ring. And now here's a topic that I actually saw a little bit of concern with in the Souls community, and that's regarding playtime and how much time approximately it would take to complete the main story. It was mentioned here that it will be about 30 hours of expected playtime if you're focusing purely on the main storyline alone. But if you include things like side quests, dungeons being fully explored, finding all the secrets, collecting every item, defeating every optional boss, encountering every possible enemy type, and exploring every playable area, this can easily be tripled for the average player. This playtime could also be more or less varied based on how the player approaches the game. This topic is about the new currency that we have, and that is the runes that you would acquire when you defeat an enemy. In Dark Souls, we had a currency known as souls for defeating enemies, but in Elden Ring, the same currency is now called runes, but operates the exact same way as souls. And let's be honest, coming from Dark Souls, we're all going to be calling them souls anyways. So this topic is in regards to the new spawn system and dying overall in the game. When you discover and rest at a site of grace, you actually respawn back at that specific checkpoint should you die in that general location. But in comparison to Dark Souls, what's new here, and from what I've seen when exploring a dungeon in the closed network test, when you die later on in the level, you actually have two options. You can either respawn at the last site of grace, or respawn at these mini checkpoints known as a Stake of Marika. These actually can't be rested at, but when you pass through them, I believe that activates the trigger for respawning there when you die going past it. This should actually make going through dungeons and caves a little less redundant if you find its earlier enemies a little too repetitive to fight. So this one's regarding the differences between the closed network test and the full release of the game. In the closed network test, some flavor text, as they described it, for what I assume would be items and interactions for objects in the world weren't fully finished, but in the full game, they stated that this has already been finalized. Some enemy placements also will have changed for the full game, as well as some NPCs either being removed or added in comparison to the available space that we got in the closed network test. Fundamentally though, the base game remains unchanged, and starting a new character will of course allow you to fully customize them to whatever hideous monstrosity you desire. I can't wait to see what kind of malformed creatures the community makes here. So this next one is about level design being different in comparison to the other Souls games, and how it actually works for itself for the better. As described by Katao in this interview, now that jumping is added to the game, levels and playable areas can now have a bunch of other parts to them that would otherwise not even be possible to reach in the past with Dark Souls. This means keeping your eyes peeled when you traverse through castles, camps, rooftops, and especially dungeons for any potential loot or secrets you might find in these newly accessible areas. And one of the critical points that Katao wanted to cover here was the open world concept and how they struggled with avoiding boredom for the player as they explore the landscape. I've personally seen people talking about this one a lot, and some are speculating that Elden Ring's world might be a bit too empty, or that it wouldn't provide enough events to keep the player entertained. Based on what we've learned here, the development team made this a large focus in that there are plenty of enemies and other stressful events for the players to encounter, while also letting you experience that little bit of downtime when traversing the lands between. The team seems very satisfied with how they've tackled this here, so no shortage of events to come across. And finally wrapping things up, Elden Ring's schedule for release is still set for February 25th, thankfully, no more delays. With the release originally planned for early January, it seems like that 1 month delay was more than enough time to deliver us a complete product that hopefully meets the original intended vision of the game. Well guys, that's really everything that I could point out that I thought was important enough to share at least. If you want to catch the full interview, check out the description below for that link video there. Anyways, I really appreciate you guys watching if you stuck around for this long, for this little info drop, and I hope to catch you gals and pals in the next one.